Hi Kunk, how are you today? Indeed, we have some news on the house, and I'm going to update you guys on that now because it's important. Well, it's been going on for some time. We actually sold the house last year and bought our new house last year just before Christmas. Me and my family, and we've only now just got a move date, and it's not 100% definite, so I don't want to have to be like, oh no, it's changed. So that's the thing. So obviously when I tell you this, just, you never know, there's a small chance it might change. I don't think it's likely, but you never know, things could get messed up again. But the day is the 19th of March. I mean April. Oh my god, I've screwed it up, said the wrong thing. Silly me. It's the 19th of April. I was going to say, if it's March, then we're a bit late, aren't we? Hi, Hot Lip Gloss, thank you so much. That's a nice thing to say, I know. I've just washed my hair actually, and this is my favourite hairstyle when I've got wet hair. And I like your name as well. Hot Light Lip Gloss. I've got lip gloss on right now myself. And hi Forgotten and Rod, how are you guys doing? Any plans for the evening, weekend, aside from packing things up? Well, I'm probably not going to start this weekend, but definitely next weekend. I'm a last minute kind of person, so probably going to start next weekend and chill this weekend. So how's everyone doing? Hi Dave as well, how are you today? So if all going well, and it is the 19th of April, that is like not this coming Monday, the following Monday. So streams next week are still on. Tuesday and Thursday streams are still on as normal next week, but very, very likely, unless things change or dates change and we get a call that it's being pushed back, then I'll be having the next week off streams, the 19th of April that week. I won't be streaming on the Tuesday or Thursday for definite, because it would just be a bit of a rush. I mean, the 19th is a Monday, so I mean that's not a day I even stream anyway on Monday now, but it's probably going to be way too much of a rush to get everything ready by the Tuesday, so I'm not going to even expect or do a stream that day, because it would be nice to take the pressure off, because there's probably going to be a few things to set up. I might have to paint my 2 rooms that I'm going to have. My office is going to be a separate room to my bedroom now, which is great, and there is going to be a few jobs that are needing to be done as well. So yes, a little bit of a delay. I mean, I'll keep you guys updated on the Discord, keep updated in the important news channel, because I'll be telling you like when I'll be coming back to streams, and once I get a better idea of when I'm settled and stuff. But I'm hoping not too much time off. I'd like it to just be a week. But of course, house moving can sometimes get complicated, so if there's ever any more time, I'll let you know. But I'm hoping all going smoothly. That's a week off is what I'm aiming for. I know, but I'll keep you updated. I'm all right pulling myself together before work. How are you, Rose? Doing all right, Diva? I kind of feel better now I've got a date for moving house, because it's worse when you don't know and you're just waiting. So it'll be just nice to get it out of the way, because it's been a bit of a pain to have it delayed. And gonna have a late breakfast. Wanted to say hi though to make sure you were doing well. Thanks, Rod. Hi Van, how are you doing? Did you hear the news, Van, about the house move? I've probably been repeating it a few times in the stream today if anyone asks. I said a bit earlier, it's not 100% yet. 100%, it's probably 95% chance it's going to be that day. There's a tiny percent chance that we'll get a phone call and it'll be pushed to another day, but it's a tiny chance, I think, at this point that will happen. It's more than likely that it will be the 19th of April. Sorry, just got here. What's a pain? Not knowing the house date, but we do now. So more than likely it's going to be the 19th of April, which is a week on Monday. So I'll be streaming next week as normal. 2 more streams after this week. And it'll be the following week, the week of the 19th, I won't be streaming. But I'll keep you all updated in the Discord if there is any changes or stuff that changes out around. But very more than likely, I'll be having the week of the 19th of April off. And hopefully it goes smoothly, no problems, and I'm ready to start streaming again the following week. If I wanted to, I could just still stream on the Tuesday, on the 20th, but I'm not going to push myself because chances are that it's going to be a bit of a setup. But the internet will already be set up when we move in, so I'm not going to have any problems there, all going well. It's more the getting my room painted and getting all my computer and green screen set up and that, and furniture that's going to be the big job. Also, it's soon, yay, indeed. So, yeah, exciting times. So, hopefully it doesn't mess us around too much or delay us too much, folks. But the one cool thing I've noticed is that our last stream until my move is going to be stream 250, because we're on stream 248 today. So we got 2 more streams next week, stream 249 and stream 250. So I think that's like a really nice milestone for the move, 250 streams. And from that point on, new house for the other streams after that. Because 250 is a nice number, right? It's 250,000, so it is a good number. Hi Pooh, I know. So it falls on a nice milestone if it's that day. And I was even thinking there might be a tiny little announcement on stream 250 as well, other than the house move, of course, because I've already would have announced that. Just a small fun announcement related to the game. Nothing like big, so don't get all like super hyped. Yeah, I don't want anyone being like, what's going on? It's all good stuff. And related to, I might give you a clue on what it's related to. Remember when we had a stream about glowing up the environment art a while ago? It might be to do with that. But no, we'll talk about that on the special stream. But it might all work out cool to announce something related to that on that day, all going smoothly. So yes, fun times indeed. And just got to answer that question. Yay, sounds good. Are you excited? Well, kind of excited, because I definitely am excited to have more room and a new space that's more roomy and not having noisy neighbours and thin walls anymore. So that's all very nice. But obviously the moving process in itself can be a bit of a pain. So I'm not like entirely looking forward to that part. But it'll be nice once it's done, I think. Hi Pooh, yes, I'm generally excited. So yeah, I'm excited for the 2 streams next week before the move. And I'm glad that it falls on, the last one will fall on stream 250. But it'll only be the last one for a week. You know, hopefully, all going well, because I'm not intending to have like too much time off. But I think having the full week to settle in will be good, and then I can come back refreshed and it not feel like a big rush. Yay! Okay, everyone, so I've finished my rambles about that side of things now. But yeah, just to conclude, keep an eye on the important news channel in the Discord if you want to keep up with the news and the goings on and any schedule news and all that. Moving takes some energy indeed. How are you anyway, Kung? How have you been? Because I know that you had to move yourself, didn't you, recently too? All right, and so what we've been doing lately is world building stuff, and I think it's a nice thing to be focusing on right now. Especially while I'm so close to the move, I'm probably going to be busy getting jobs sorted and things packed away for between now and the move. It's nice to do something a little bit easier. I mean, it's not entirely easy. World building is blooming hard, right? To get these cool ideas down, but it's not like intense game development that you need pure loads of focus on. So it's a good thing to do on stream right now. And we have been talking about, well, we talked about government last stream. Before that, we talked about tech and magic. So we've been sort of dipping ourselves into each of these things and kind of getting an idea of how these particular things are going to be in our world. And I'm sure there'll be an opportunity to go even into more depth with each of these at some point too, because we've only just touched the surface on things like tech and magic right now. But we definitely got a cool idea of how things are shaped, which is great. And to sum up last stream, the government chats were really cool. We had some cool ideas, and we definitely put in a bit of a twist on how the government works in this world. If any of you have read what's there, while this has been up in the background, it's definitely like not like your typical government, but it does follow a specific what do they call it, a meritocracy. I bet I've said it wrong, but basically what that is when people are elected from like their skills and talents, not like being there from birth, basically, not being in the line for the throne because you're the son of the previous king or whatsoever. It's done an entirely different way, and we've got some more info here, and it got really cute and creative, like some of the thoughts the community had for some story ideas and potential character arcs, because it's all going to be based on talent, skill, particularly art being the skill in particular, the king that is valued for the next king, which allows so much potential cool future kings and queens in the game. And we're thinking way ahead here. This is end game stuff for these people being king. Obviously that's bad news for King Dolos, because that would mean they're not king anymore, and it leads to some wholesome, heartwarming moments. That's a pretty crazy moment. One of the friends becomes king, but not impossible. I mean, right, they are painters, aren't they, the fruits? But there's potential different branches and different options for who the hero could choose or have the sort of say in who becomes king or pushes to become king or queen during endgame. But yes, it was fun, and I'm super happy with that. It feels quirky and wholesome and very different to a typical fantasy. And I'm sure there are other stories out there that follow a meritocracy in a certain way. Meritocracy, oh my gosh, I'm butchering it. And I'd like to know any movies or stories or books that do have that sort of system, because it'd be cool to get some inspirations and things. You are right, but some things happened and we're dealing with them. Hopefully things will brighten up, and I'm staying positive and we'll be better on the other side. Well, hugs to you come from all of us. We're here for you, and hopefully streams can make your day brighter if possible. Dave wants me to repeat the words so I butcher it again. I'm going to say it properly, merit, because it's short for, it's merit, isn't it, basically? That's what we're getting at here, because people are elected from merit. So it's meritocracy. I get embarrassed at how I say it sometimes because I'm such a doofus. The root word of meritocracy is merit, and it doesn't get transformed from being fixed on. Yeah, David basically said what I said. Hee. So merit are then crusty like democracy. Yeah, there we go. For some reason, obviously. Okay. There's a really cool article though, where I don't know if it had that one in particular on the article. But there was 36 other ones, different crasses. And it was really cool to look through all the different types. It just shows that government structures aren't necessarily just tied to a few. There's so many. You can be creative and put a twist on it as well. There was even one that was done by luck, like a lottery, and I thought, whoa, that would be a very risky government. Because I need not fear butchering words. Yes, it's definitely one of the things I can tend to do. But none of us are perfect, right? We've all got our flaws. Alright, so obviously because this system's in place, the thing that springs to mind is, how did it form like that in the first place, right? Because it probably wasn't like that through all of time and all of history. Very unlikely. In fact, it was probably very different to that once upon a time in the age of first men, perhaps. And it probably was flawed, and it was noticed that the system before was flawed, and that's what inspired the change. Because it didn't work out. Maybe it caused a war, and they decided to change things around, or someone with power and a lot of influence managed to do that, and that's the Walker legend. We felt they were the most appropriate one in our pantheon to be the one that stands for that, being as their monument's going to be the one based in the capital. But there's every chance that the Dra and Kit legends could have had some influence too, because they were from the same age and lived in different parts of the world. There could have been some kind of union between all three, if they were all alive at the same time, that is, because we don't know for sure at this point if they were alive at the exact same time or around the same time. But it's not impossible for them to be, because it actually could work that it was like that, based on what those two legends stand for as well. So that's something to keep in mind, which is what I've put there. And to you guys in chat that spotted that and was observant, so Met in particular, who's just come in, what a coincidence. And one funny thing about the term metricus is, I keep saying metro for some reason instead of merit. That's what I'm doing wrong. Coined to make fun of a system of schooling used in Britain once, rather than by people who thought it was a good idea. It was, hang on, let me read that, because I was half distracted by how silly I am saying metro. Coined to make fun of a system of schooling used in Britain once, rather than by people who thought it was a good idea. Really, that's interesting for sure. I mean, although for sure it's flawed, and which is what I've put here. You know, it's still a flawed system, no doubt about it. You don't necessarily still end up with the best ruler, but I still think it's better than you know, the old-fashioned line from birth, typical monarchy. So I like this idea. I'm a fan, and I think there was honourable intentions behind it with this Walker legend and the other two legends, if they had a say in it too. But of course, it's not 100% good, because unfortunately Dolus, although he's super skilled and talented at art, which is why he was elected in the first place, he unfortunately is quite a passive person and a poor politician, and he's allowing Traitorio to probably walk all over him. With, you know, it might not be obvious that Traitorio is a bad guy, because we're actually going to be ironic with his name, and although he's a traitor, he's gonna like be more of a less of a politician about fear and more about charm and sort of manipulation. I personally prefer those kind of leaders rather than the ones that are about all out terror, because things are a bit more interesting when it's not so obvious on the surface. And yeah, so there's a really cool thing suggested, some really interesting future plot points that were really cute. and I think there's a lot of potential with this. But what I wanted to talk about today was expand from this current present day government discussion we had, because this is purely what it's like in the present day, this meritocracy. But talking about the past and what it was like before is something I'm also intrigued by. I've got our history of the world timeline up here, and obviously the monarchy begins at this point in time. This is when everything, life as we know it, comes to be at this point, the age of sentient objects. But of course we had a few little events happen before that, such as the war between humans and Dra, which was a regional war, but there was definitely a larger war in the past. And we had, so it was fairly recent, the forming of the monarchy and government, and we have roughly got here some points in time when civilizations formed, two different ones. It began, the age of the first men, as tribes, as it does, as it usually begins, but then they slowly get more civilized, become good at building, become good at with technology and tactics and strategy, and they start forming something quite powerful potentially. But these civilizations would have eventually fell, of course. They definitely spanned a couple of thousand years each, so they had their time, just kind of paralleling how it has been here with the Roman Empire and the ancient Greeks. And then at this point in time is when the monarchy forms. So things progress and change even more at this point in the Age of Kings, and something would have inspired that change, clearly, because it didn't exist here, but it does here. So what I'm thinking right now is that the Walker legend possibly was alive around this time and inspired the forming of the monarchy as we know it today, with these rules, which I'm going to bold. And things could have been different before, during the age of the second civilization and prior, but it was all bad. It was all something that went bad. War. It was a time of terror and horror for people, very likely. And it might have not seemed bad at one point. Maybe life was great, but then obviously it didn't work out, and they're trying to learn from their mistakes and not repeat history by altering the system a bit. It's possible that it could, at this point in time, the system could have been a birth line and not to do with skill and talent, and it got changed halfway through. But because it's been around for so little time, only 300 years before this new era, the Fading Stars, there's not been many years to, I feel like, yes, probably the very beginning of the monarchy and the very first official king in the Age of Kings was when being from a king from skill and talent, when you were elected for those things. So I do have a few thoughts on these. It's rough. A lot of it's just random thoughts, and it'll all need sort of sewing together with all the gaps, but there's definitely some interesting ideas. So I'm going to make another page. Would be ruled by city. Yes, it seems like a step up. Indeed it is. It's like definitely more civilized, but it could have been civilized before, but in a way that wasn't, was bad. I could do with getting the document outline up so I can get to things easier. but even that's a bit confusing because it's bullet pointed literally everything. So I'll just scroll up for now. I think it might be here that we'll make a page. Here, the ages in depth. So we've already done one for the Age of Stars, which, you know, that will probably need a bit more development in the future, but I think it's at a good enough point where we understand the key things that happened in that age, with the elf, legend, vampire, and the moon's fall. And it's going to be cool to do the same for the Age of the First Man, because we have barely talked about that. Even if what we discussed today is rough around the edges and just a summary and outline, I'll still be okay with that. And then, like I said last stream, we can slowly move into the present day time and the reptile and human war next week perhaps. But it's probably smart to do it in chronological order, right? Start with the early times, and we can move into the present day, the close to present day wars after that, because then we'll get an idea of what happened before and how now could potentially be influenced by that. So Age of First Men, and we'll structure it in a similar way. We'll just write a bunch of notes and see what cool things we come up with, because last stream it was really so like valuable. It was insane. I mean, I really particularly like the ideas you guys came up with about Nigel potentially being a fugitive king, and Violet and the Fruits, because that is really, I can just picture those scenes in my head, and they're just really cool and so rewarding. You know, playing the whole game or most of the game and then seeing something like that happen with a character, and you having a say in which character it is based on what story branches you've potentially picked. So it's super cool. I think we've made a really good decision having the king be elected in this way, because with the art thing, because if it was from birth, they wouldn't have the option to ever be king. We'd be very limited, and that's boring. So obviously we're not going to have these details in, because this is all the age of the stars. So I watched a few YouTube videos last night about empires, and all the nerdy things like how they succeed, different kinds of empires and why empires fall, and all that juicy stuff, like basically very much like real life empires of the past in our history, what's happened to them, and because it's a cool idea to sort of mirror them, not necessarily where you copy it and your story and history is the same as ours, because that's kind of boring. It's nice to sort of put your own unique twist on it, but it definitely helps to sort of look at them and how they succeeded and why they failed and why they became powerful in the first place, just so you can get realistic about it and it makes sense, the story and history does, and it's not just entirely random and unbelievable. So pardon me, I'm going to do a big massive cough. Let me mute for a second. There we go. When you said empires, I heard vampires, which was a very different discussion indeed. LOL. Okay, so we do know, we're going to start simple here and write what we know, and then we'll just expand over the course of the stream. But looking at our timeline, what we do know is that there was two. This, I'm not going to even focus on the tribe one for now, because I imagine that when I think of that, I don't think of anything really coming about that had a big influence to the people of today. Life was probably a bit more simple during the ages of the wandering tribes, but I still don't want to ignore it completely, because I'm sure the Dra and the beach races would have sort of been influenced as well by that time. Particularly the first civilization could have been influenced by this time, so it's worth thinking about, but I want to particularly focus on these two just roughly. We don't have to like go super in depth here and have them all like super mapped out or anything, because that's asking a lot, but I think it'd be valuable to at least consider who they were and why, what they did, and why it affected the monarchy becoming what it is today. And it making total sense why it became like that as well. Like, you could like totally think no wonder they went into a meritocracy after that. So obviously them becoming a meritocracy would have been because of what happened here. I'm assuming they were influenced by that era. And this one is a bit of more of a question mark, but we can focus on this one first, seeing as this one's more recent and this one directly affects this one. But we can still keep our ears out and eyes sort of open for that one as well, potentially. Noop, Droop, how are you doing? Welcome to the stream. How are you doing? I hope you had a wonderful day. So the YouTube videos I watched last night were super long. There was a lot of info packed into them, and I just hope I can like remember it all and get it all down this stream, because I think what I listen to is going to be very valuable for what we can potentially shape ours to be. Like, I have made some notes, so I'll try and get as much down as I can. Right, so where to start off? I think we'll start off with the different kinds of empires first, and then we'll move on to why empires succeed, and then we'll move into why they fall. And then we could get inspired and potentially get ideas for us, like what fits best for our story. Okay, so can I bullet point this? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I see this as two different types. It's technically three, but I think two of those three could be in the same one. And I'm going to split it into two and write about each of these different ones. I actually put types instead of kinds because I just prefer that wording, because we've got two. So maybe one of the civilizations could have been one type of empire, and the other one, the first one, could be the other one. Just so we don't have them both be too similar. But that's just something to consider. So as for what the different ones are, the first one is resource and security empire, which, to summarize, resources is all about food, water, stones, dyes, spices, wood, and all the things you need, right? Why you go to different lands to get things that you might not have on your land, and expanding your empire from that. And security kind of goes with it. It's a bit different, but and for different reasons. You're not seizing the land for resources, but you're seizing the land so you can be stronger together and one big empire, rather than lots of little disconnected cities. So it's kind of, I suppose, like generally, that's how they form. They start small and get bigger like that. But the second one is nationalist ones, which, you know, that one's more personal, and there's a lot of, I think most of us get that. Most of it can be fascism, obviously, but not necessarily. A lot of it, there is fear for people losing the traditions, but one that I'm thinking more of is an empire that's like the opposite of that, and one that wants to expand their empire so that they can share their values and cultures with the rest of the world, which kind of seems honourable, but it also isn't, because it can like cause this single culture mindset that can make people feel alienated and stuff. So this is all very vague stuff I've researched, but I'm thinking of how to sort of implement that in with our story, so it works and makes sense with the world that we're building. So for this second civilization in particular, we'll focus on this one first, because that's the most modern one, that's the closest to when the monarchy was formed. The idea I had in mind, and I don't know what you guys think, I mean, I'm totally open to all sorts of opinions and perspectives for this one, but there was one in particular that came to mind for me by sort of summary of what they could have been like, and the leader at that time. I'm gonna label this as, I might start a different bullet point actually. I could expand on all those two in a sec, but we'll talk specifically about what ours is going to be. Ideas, because like I said, just ideas at this point. This was also when humans came into existence, which could be something to consider. In fact, what I'm thinking could connect with that, because what I'm imagining is this second civilization could have been a sort of nationalist empire, not the resource security type one. Maybe the first could be that type, but this one would have fallen under this one. And the reason why is because I imagine, because this was the time when all races were in existence at this point, the kit had arrived, and so had humans. Some people like the elves and fae could have seen this happening and seen it in a positive light. You could see it in a negative light and be like, oh no, how dare they be here, let's kill them all. But in fact, I'm trying to think of it differently to that, and not from the typical nationalist one, but the opposite of that, where the fae and elves might have looked at these new races coming to be and saw it as let's spread our knowledge to and our lives to these people and share our peace and wealth and prosperity with them. And it could have started out as super positive, like that positive message that many people would get behind, because you think let's do that. But obviously, as they do that and sort of take over different regions throughout the country, the people that lived, that became one with this empire, might have eventually felt alienated, and like they were being made to be part of a single culture, and that could start a war. But and obviously that would put the Fae or the elves as potential rulers at that time. I feel like we need a Fae. We need some kind of Fae ruler. Because the reason for that is because of magic. We talked a while ago about, we know the elves and Fae have got the largest magical cores last stream. No, was it last week when we talked about that? And let me look at my notes, because there's a lot to get down here, a lot of things to tie in. What I'm about to write is all going to help link in with the Cloud City and what that's currently like today, because we know they're more isolated, and also why they might be fine with leaving humans to rule in the capital and not like be a threat to them. And also, oh gosh, there's something else as well that is important to mention as well, to do with a magical invention that sprung to mind. So I've got to get all these thoughts down so it's not too much of a messy mishmash for you guys. So I'm going to summarise it like I did for this age down here, the age of the stars. Remember when I had all these ideas and they were all like super muddled? And I made bullet points for each and broke everything down and connected it all. Well, I'll do the same for this. So these, we can have subtitles from the second civilization here. Right, so okay. Okay, so one idea I had connects with how things could be run in the present day. It would link the second civilization with the current government of King Dolos and Traitorio, which I think is cool. That they've had a direct influence on the other, and what that is, so I'm going to actually get current government in here as well as a bullet point, but I know it's not part of the age of the first men, but we could word it as how the current government are impacted by the second. Or hang on, I'm trying to think how to organise this because I've got so much in my head and it's getting all the ideas down. The look she's giving is like serious writer block vibe. Yeah, it's the opposite, Ultima. I've got all these ideas, but it's getting them down tidily. That's what the issue is here. Isn't writer's block when you don't have any ideas? Okay, so right, I might go back to this in a sec. The reason for that is because there's one particular point here, the link I'm mentioning, that is quite key, and it might work to do it in a different order instead, so all this actually makes sense. But we'll go back to that page in a sec because there's going to be a lot to fill in about that second civilization. Right, so we'll go back into the government section because I just want to spend about 10 minutes talking about current government and what makes them strong today. And so it's really realistic, because if they're not strong, like, just nobody would take them seriously. And what makes them strong is going to be thanks to the second civilization in a way. So what we'll put this here. So I think this might be a good spot for that. So what makes the government succeed? That's probably a good headline for that. Okay, so what makes them succeed? There's two factors that are important here for any government or empire to actually have strength and last long term, and without them you're screwed, basically. So those two things are communication and control. So obviously, to summarise each, communication, that's how the government communicate with each other and the citizens, local ones and ones further out, because without communication, it's gonna you haven't got that strength, and it's all gonna not be effective in the long run, especially if you're waiting for days for letters to get to and from places and different regions. It would all just be a real pain. So strong communication is essential here. Control, the other C word, is literally how the government have control over their citizens. Terror is a common one here, but like I said earlier, I'm not thinking of terror for this one. I want it to be a bit more subtle than that, and more realistic, and probably going with the government seeming more attractive, actually, and seeming preferable, and people liking being part of it. And people are less likely to rebel that way. And I think having free trade and security and paying their taxes and being able to get food and supplies and resources, which is kind of how we're shaping this here, because Everbloom are getting their resources from the nearby farm, vice versa. I'm sure Everbloom give their water and some of their resources that we talked about last week to the farmlands and the capital as well. So there's clearly this trade between the regions, and it's all done fairly. It's not a civilization. It's not a society where the government are ruling by terror and are just invading and all that. It's very much done okay. We know that Traitor is not a good guy, but he doesn't make that obvious on the outside. So that sort of control, where you're sort of making people feel comfortable, is a good way for the government to stay in power too, because they've got no reason to rebel if they feel secure, and to them their life is okay. It's better than slavery, and to them they're okay with how it is, especially with the way the king is set up, with this honourable, becomes king from having a good talent, skill set, art. It's all very honourable and nice on the surface, and I think overall people would be happy and content with this kind of government. So the control thing is pretty much sorted. We've got that. It's very much they're going with the sort of opposite of terror control, where they make people feel comfortable, and that being part of this government is preferable to being without them. But the communication one is the other thing, which is what I wanted to expand on just before we move back into discussing the second civilization. The reason for that is because the idea for why I think they should have a good communication is to do with something that came about in the second civilization age, which I'll talk about in a sec. I'll catch up with chat first. Happy government, that's rare. Not really, I mean, maybe it is, and if so, that's good because we're doing something unique here if that's the case. But I feel it's more common than you think. I think a lot of fictional stories, or people immediately think, oh my god, just like terror, rulers that just put terror on their people, and it's all very black and white. But really, that's not that. Those sort of rulers don't last long, in all honesty, because people just rebel in the end. And really, being a smarter ruler is actually making people feel they're under this life that is happy and comfortable. And it's not happy. I mean, it's probably far from perfect. I'm sure Traitorio is pretty harsh with some of his measures and laws, but he does have to go by the laws of the Walker legend, and he can't. And a lot of those laws were honourable, and he does twist them to his own self-interest, self-motivated reasons. But it's overall, this is a strong government, and they have made the current economy of the raindrops and have a lot of strength. So everything seems fair on the surface, but just because it's fair on the surface doesn't mean it's fair deep down, right? That, like, really, that's really the more intriguing governments to me than the ones that are clearly evil and there's no black and white. The universe you're creating is very detailed. Thanks, Arthur. I'm very passionate about world building and writing stories, that's why. Oh, that's an idea, a happy government, happy people, like no one has anything to complain about. Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if we should go over the top with the happy thing. I think there should definitely be people who are a bit unsatisfied but in a way where it's just mediocre, their life, maybe. A bit like how it is for us in our age, where we do okay, we're not in slavery, and it's not as like horrible, but we still don't like the government, right? So it's kind of probably closer to that, but with this government of our story being a bit more corrupt than any of our governments, even more so. But it's just that the people wouldn't know it. Any corrupt stuff going on isn't public knowledge because of propaganda hiding it, and the government being good at keeping secrets. So I wouldn't say they're over the top happy and it's like, oh my god, I love Traitorio with all my heart, or anything like that. But I'd say people are content. Maybe that's kind of how it is. Not saying Traitorio doesn't have his fanboys or fangirls. Maybe he does, because he's probably quite a charming leader. But there could equally be people that don't like Traitorio as well on the other side. People are different. Not every citizen is going to have the same opinion. Thank you for the alert, Rav. How are you doing? But yes, so I'm going to just stay on the control thing. Not that they make the government seem they make the way of life under this government seem preferable to life without it. And that sort of contentment alone is enough for people to not want to revolt, because we're not living in an age of where people are revolting in this period, in the present, in the game. That's what we've got to realise here. There's nobody wanting to start a war with Traitorio or Dolos. Everything's going pretty okay, and despite a few moaners who might moan about paying too much taxes perhaps, or not getting enough fair food amounts from the capital, it wouldn't be anything serious enough for them to sort of rebel, at least in this point in time. Whether there's a plot point that happens in the future that makes people change their minds is another thing altogether. But will it, in this, as the game begins and even going into episode 2, everything seems okay. And there's probably folks who've seen his true self. Indeed, even Dolos, the king, he probably absolutely loves Traitorio. He's probably a massive fanboy, because he's sort of put him as he's put him in that position of prime minister in the first place, so he's clearly got a lot of trust in him. And although Dolos is a bit of a drip, I don't think he'd be stupid enough to put a clear madman in power. Other than clearly being a bit silly for not realising the name Traitoria sort of gives it away, but that's what makes it funny. Yeah. Hi, how are you doing, Sora? I hope you're well. So that's the one thing that makes the government succeed, the fact that they are being very smart with how they control their people. They're not an obvious dictatorship on the surface. And communication is other one, like I said. Now this one's still really important. I think it's very it's sort of underlooked at, but you got to sort of realise they have to communicate with each other effectively, otherwise it's going to mess things up. Like, imagine if Traitorio was at the other side of the world, Dolos in his castle temporarily, because Traitorio is a bit of a traveller, and they've got other government people working under them, and mayors in Lakefall and mayors in the farmlands, probably like secondary government people who communicate with them. Because what we got to remember, let's just get the map up so that everyone can clearly just see how the country is laid out. The capital is here, this spot here, and we've got all these regions bordering the capital, and they for sure would, these regions are all part of the government. They're all they all probably pay their taxes to government, and in order to have protection and food sources and all that. So they would want to communicate with at least the leaders, not probably the people as much, but with each other, so that if anything happened, like something serious happened, they would be able to have instant contact and not have to wait days for letters. The common people might have to only have mail and letter as their form of communication. Like the ordinary, who knows. But as for Dolos and Traitorio himself, they're one step above that and have something magical as a way to communicate. Now, they're humans, which means they don't actually have magic themselves. That's important to remember here. They don't have any inner power that can make them instantly communicate with each other. So the way I thought of doing this is that the leader, the ruler of the second civilization, and this is why I wanted them to be a fae, because they would have invented a magical device that allows for instant and long distance communication, but only the powerful have access to this device, like people who Traitorio allows. So someone who's just an ordinary farmer or merchant wouldn't have access to this, but Dolos would, Traitorio would, and perhaps any mayor or leader of a region would. and it would be their way to have instant communication with each other. If we wanted a scene in the game where Dolos needs to talk to Traitorio immediately because something's happened, then Dolos would want to be able to talk to Traitorio right away without waiting months for a letter to get back to him. That would be very inefficient, and realistically that kind of government wouldn't last very long in power, because if there was some rebels, they wouldn't get in touch with each other in time to organise an army and a defence and all that. You need effective communication. So I thought that would be a cool way, some kind of technology device made by magic. Whether it's in the, like, there's something in the castle. I don't know how it could look, but it's just like an idea right now. They use it because that would be the only way for them to use something like that, because they're humans and they can't use magic themselves naturally. So that's like one idea. And maybe the floating island or tower could act as sort of satellite or communications tower for the magic. And yeah, I'm not 100% sure about the technical side of it and how it can look or how it could even work, because I'm not really a techie nerd. So for sure you guys might be able to assist me there. I have like the overall sort of idea in mind where I imagine it's a super powerful device that's allowing these leaders to communicate with each other quick and fast, because this is a medieval setting, right? So traditionally you could only use letter, and that's very slow, but we got magic in this world, and we can be quirky and creative with magic, and we can create anything we dream up, right? So we shouldn't like miss that opportunity to have some intriguing way of communicating that powerful people can take advantage of. They wouldn't want the common people to have access to this, however, because if the common people did, then they could start communicating with each other quick, and that could lead to all sorts of trouble, like them sort of integrating and also realising that any propaganda is fake if they talk to each other. The government overall would have less control over their citizens if the citizens were able to communicate to each other fast. I read somewhere that that's why sci-fi governments struggle, because technology usually enables people and citizens to communicate quicker, but it's something that medieval governments can have an advantage of, because the people are more isolated over long distances and they don't have that instant communication. But it'd be interesting if Traitorio and Dolos and some of the other leaders did, because it would give them a huge advantage if they had instant communication. And maybe others in the world have a way of instant communicating, like especially if you're magical in nature, like an elf or fae, you could easily have the ability to do something similar and create a similar way of communicating perhaps, but they definitely won't want most of the population to be able to pull off what they're doing, probably. But yeah, feel free to throw ideas down about what this magical device or ability or tech could be and how it could work, if anyone's getting any ideas in mind. There was a when I was watching a YouTube video, there was an example that was given for a book, a fantasy book that did something similar, but I'm not sure of the details. But Brandon Sanderson's Way of Kings, I think it was. They have something that allows people to transmit large amounts of writings across great distances. So that was their way of doing it. Obviously, we do our own cool one. So whatever it's going to be, I'm open to thoughts at this point in time. It's not set in stone, or I don't have anything in particular, but whatever's going to work best and make sense. And with our world and what we've built. So I'm going to just put here Dolos, Traitorio, and other government leaders that aren't as high in the ranks as them, obviously, but you know, other people that they speak to and need to communicate with, like the leaders of the smaller regions, for example. I know that we will have a mayor in Lakefall, so maybe, I mean, I imagine at Lakefall are pretty isolated and they're allowed to kind of do as they please and they're free. But I think the current government generally do let people live the life they want to live. That's how they're making them feel content and that life is preferable, right? That you can do as you want without much bother, as long as you pay your taxes and as long as you give us your resources when we require them. And the trade routes go on, then all is good and we're not going to cause problems for you. Maybe that Dulles and Traitoria have a sort of agreement like that. Have a way of instantly communicating with each other from long distances. It's what this technology is a question mark right now, but it needs to be effective. It would be cool, well, it would be interesting if the ruler from the second civilization was responsible for the creation of this device or tech or magic. Simply because, I mean, that's optional, the having the second ruler be responsible for it, but it would just be a way to sort of link the two periods of time together and show that one was influenced by the other rather than have them be completely separate. But in any case, the current government is clearly influenced by the second civilization, even so, because I imagine that this whole rule of the Walker only came to even exist because of what happened in the past. Because without something happening in the past, some kind of terrible war, what else would have inspired this change, right? So because of this Walker Legends belief, what you are is not decided by your birth. To me, the thing that stands out is that someone who came into power because of their birth was a terrible leader that caused a war, perhaps, and that's why they were inspired to shake things up so that they would never be in that situation ever again, which is why I thought of Fae. I mean, it could be an elf too, but I was kind of thinking of Fae just to give a bit of limelight to a Fae for once, because we've already had an elven vampire legend, and that one is gonna have, that historical elf will have a lot of sort of focus as a legend. So when it comes to historical figures, I like to mix it up a bit, and it only makes sense for it to have been a fae or elf because they're the old races who have the strongest use of magic. And to me, a sort of ruler that would have got crazy with their magic seems appealing, simply because that could give a good explanation for why the Fae City are so isolated today, because it's their way of making up to people for that time, if that makes any sense. Like, because otherwise the question comes to mind is of why don't the Fae or elves of the Cloud City revolt against the capital? Why don't they just take Traitorio and Dulles down? The answer to that is probably because, as Van described in a previous stream, they see them as their children, like humans and the other races are their children, so they want them to live in peace and harmony, because by nature the Fae and elves are peaceful. They're peaceful folk and they don't want to start any wars. And I think this mad fae, if we go for this, because we got to have a bad leader of the past, haven't you? You got to have one. And it would be cool to have them there. If people, trusted them, because fae, elves, they're calm, peaceful people. But this was just a one-off case of someone getting carried away with their magic and using it wrong, and eventually starting a war. I'll read chain of set, don't worry guys. I'm trying to just get my thoughts together because something else came to my mind as well. Gosh, when something comes to your mind and you're like, oh my gosh, I've got to mention that, but then you forget. Oh yes, and that's why I mentioned this. Let's go back up. When I listed the nationalism thing and I was saying I was going to go like the opposite of the typical fascist one for the fae roulettes, because I imagine it would have started all nice once upon a time, like let's spread our peace and harmony to other nations and expand our empire to the main continent from the fae city. And they did that and it was nice and people trusted the fae leader and thought, this is lovely, you wanted to expand and help other people and help our children, the humans that have come into being and the kit. It would have seemed all like that at first, but then eventually the greed overtook them and then they became mad with magic. Something like that, just some rough ideas. Hi Nate, how you doing? More law writing today? Yes, indeed. We're doing world building, Nate. How are you? Maybe they are a different government. I could see elf fae having a different ruler and leadership. Not even sure that the elf and fae would have to be in the same nation. Very true, Van. And that's what we've got to think about now. So I'm trying. Let's get back to this Age of First Men page that I made. We've got 25 pages here now, so it's getting harder to find the page we're after. But we're the Age of First Men. So as we said, the main thing we know about this age is that there was two civilizations. This first civilization, a big blank to me at the moment who that could have been, because that was much earlier. But I'm thinking now more about the second civ, because they were the ones that influenced the law of today in the government, with people now aren't a leader because of their birth, but from merit, from skill. So clearly from that rule, from that key rule that the Walker states, birth is bad. Something happened where someone from birth was in power and was bad, and now they want it different. They want people to be given a fair shot and not necessarily limit the throne to someone that was just born to it because they were the son of someone. So naturally, because of that, so a fae or an elf, but I'm thinking fae. The idea of an evil, not necessarily evil because it doesn't have to be that black and white, but a very a ruler that started a war, like being a magical fae, seems kind of cool. I'm not sure about their if they were what their gender would be yet, but definitely I kind of like the idea. Obviously that doesn't reflect well on the fae at the present day, that there was a leader like that once upon a time who got carried away with their magic, but that would explain why they're isolated today and are peaceful as well, and don't really interfere. So yes, they could have been responsible for the magical device, but not necessarily, because they might have been too selfish to create any magical tech for other people to use, unless that was what they did in the beginning, that won people over. Because let's get some thoughts down first of all, because the thing is, it's not realistic to have a person come in power that is hated, because nobody would want someone who's horrible in power. Usually this terrible ruler starts off as someone people actually admire. They're sort of blind to their evil side. They manipulate. It kind of would be a parallel to Traitorio in a way, because we're going down a similar route with Traitorio. Evil inside, but not on the surface. It's not obvious. It's like a very, very subtle terror. Very subtle. Considering how large the world is, you could even have a Walkadra or Kitka nation as well. Yeah, you bring that up and it's an interesting thing. It might actually be useful for us to spend some time looking at this map and actually thinking of them as countries and where they would have been. Like we've sort of started to place these monuments in areas, so that's definitely a helpful guide for where certain peoples and civilizations would have been. But what we do know here is that there's two on this continent. There is two. Let's get a big brush. There's two different zones, all in all. I'm going to highlight this. There's two cities, that's why. There's two very different places. You've got your city to the west and your city to the east that seem completely separate from the other, because one thing we do know is that the government, the main government with Traitorio in Dolos, probably don't have anything to do with the west. You could easily say that is because the terrain is too treacherous and dangerous, so they don't go near it. I mean, you've got the Badlands, you've got the volcano zone, you've got the desert, you've got the jungle. It would make sense that they wouldn't want to go near it. Maybe they've tried, but it's just too inhospitable. I can't say the word for them. Because we do have a city here, and once upon a time it was very luxurious, it was artistic, the kit was awesome, they inspired artists to come about and it was amazing. But unfortunately, because there was no real leadership, it started as a safe haven and it was great. It was a time of escape from the war, but as the decades and centuries went on, that would turn into an anarchy, right? Like if there's no solid leadership, eventually things just go bad, and that is could be the reason why it's become the centre of crime it is today. I mean, this is hundreds of years, even thousands of years after the Kit legends passed on, so times are very different now. But one thing that's interesting is what was influenced here as the escape from the war originally is now existing in the capital, because that is now the nation of the arts, with having rulers be artistic. So it's like it's switched. And that's something to have in mind too, the fact that we know there was a war, because the safe haven wouldn't have existed if there wasn't a time of war back in the Age of First Men. So 100% there was a war bad enough to make the Kit legend escape with a bunch of men at that time to the other side of the world to build a safe haven. Now, maybe it was the Mad Viking. They had a civil war perhaps with their nation at the time. If they went with the whole ambition of spreading their peace and prosperity to all during that time, maybe that was what gained them the empire in the first place, that great positive message of let's spread our prosperity to all regions in the world. People would have got behind something like that. So if that was the Fae's original goal, but then he lost his way over the years, got greedy with his magic, had a civil war, the Kit ran with other people and escaped the war. That sort of scenario fits, I think, and I can imagine it working. But as I was saying, we have got two very different places. One is very scenic, medieval, traditional, ruled by law and order in the present day. The other one is very gritty, very, very sort of chaotic and not run by law and order, very much the opposite. And the places are just probably not as populated either, though I could imagine the desert zone has its share of draw. And the urban zone is definitely very populated, but the other areas are probably more wild, and they're inhospitable and stuff. And you can't even count the Cloud City because that's an island off a continent and they're so isolated, but let's not forget they still exist too, but it's sort of like they're living their own lives now. And I'll catch up with you guys. So before I catch up with chat, I was going to just say, because what Van said sort of made me remember, these could be two different countries, right? We've got all these little regions and we've got one big continent. We've got two cities. We've got the capital, but that could be the capital too of its own country if we decide to, because it kind of makes sense to sort of give each of these two their own names so we can keep them distinct from each other rather than call them the west side or the east side. So I'm for eventually thinking of names for these two red circles that I've highlighted as their own country, and those two countries form this one big continent that is the world of this game. And then you've got the Floating Cloud City that's a separate place off it. Thank you, Darkstone Digital, for the raid. I super appreciate that. Thank you so much. Let's give a shout out, and I've got a lot of chat to catch up with, so I'll be reading what you've said in a sec. Darkstone Digital, what did you get up to today? Tell us what you were doing. Thanks so much for stopping by and popping in the stream and passing the love. I super appreciate that. And Kung said this music is so inspiring and happy. Yeah, it's I've got a good playlist. I've got some more tunes to still add to the playlist actually. I might do that when I've moved. There's about 2 hours worth of others from the same composer to add. I've got so much choice of what to have in our RPG. It's crazy because this is all copyright free track stuff, so be great to use them. There's a real diverse selection as well, and there's similar motifs in a lot of the tracks, which is great because then it all sounds like it's from the same thing, which is the idea. Okay, so Met said, it is interesting that the elves don't have a distinct kingdom despite being the oldest. Maybe they're just everywhere because they're spread out before there were any other races. Oh, and then that's the rulers' names could be one of the insults. Yeah, I'm glad you remembered the insults because we started making some list of swears, some curse words that could come from the legends. Just like in our word we have Christ and Jesus and oh my God. We'd have simpler, but with our God's names instead. So that would really, really be cool in the dialogue. It would really help with the world. Communication tech could also have been put initially to send battle commands to the Fey rulers' lieutenants, but when new governments came about, they kept in contact, and the Fey Kingdom considers them the Fey King's liaisons internally, even though they see themselves as ruling their own kingdom. I'll read that again in a minute, but in response to the earlier thing you said about the elves not having their own distinct kingdom, that's something we got to think about. Right, so we could always have a little bit of chat about that now before we expand on the second civilization stuff. We know that the floating cloud zone, I can't speak, is sort of a mix of Fey and Elf. Although we sort of see it as the Fey kingdom, there's definitely, our elves are definitely part of that city too. Maybe, I guess the question is, shall we handle it that it's half and not necessarily more fae over elves? Or shall we just see that as the fae city mainly, and elves are there, but it's not really their home? I guess it depends what direction we want to take it, because either way could work. But as for where elves would have lived, Everbloom Forest, before the reptiles would have been there, I imagine. We know that the Lakefall tree was planted there by people of that time, so they made a home there. And so did the Grey Elf legend, the herbalist healer. He lived there for some time, so Everbloom Forest could have easily ended up the home of the elves, due to that sort of law we've built. We know the reptiles ended up there in probably very early age of First Men, when the tribes formed. That could have been the time when reptiles made it theirs. For sure, I imagine that the reptiles would have lived in Lakefall and established themselves there for many, many centuries, even thousands of years before the humans eventually invaded, because that's what makes it kind of bad that the humans did that, because it was their land for so long. But someone had to live there before the reptiles did. We know that reptiles didn't exist until the age of the First Men, so that leaves many, many, many tens of thousands of years where others would have lived there. That could have been dragons, the ancestors of the Dra, if we want, but it also could have been elves, and it could have been all of them in harmony. I think the elves and fae could. I think it makes sense for them to enjoy living in harmony rather than be divided, considering we're sort of building them as this more peaceful utopia of a nation of people who don't like war and sort of discourage violence and don't want to harm their human children in the capital. That's kind of what the rule most of them probably go by. But if we want to make fae and elves distinct from each other, we could always have that harmonious belief, something that elves believe, but the fae are more fiery than that. Maybe the fae are more violent in nature, and if we're going for a mad fae king, then that would go with that. But it's not like we want to put everyone in a race into a box, a stereotype, because they're all different. Even if we see the fae and elves as the peaceful race, it doesn't mean they're 100% of them peaceful. You can get the odd really evil one who's hungry for war among them, which is why it's interesting to mix it up by having some kind of conqueror or emperor that was the most evil of all time in history as a fae. Or something like that, to shake things up a bit from the norm for them. And a lot of them probably feel very guilty about that person if it's the case, and want to be isolated from the rest of the world now for that. And because they're so magical in nature, the elves and fae, and have this power more than others, it would be easy for some of them to get a bit greedy with it. And it's very admirable, the ones that don't. But it's also not impossible to think you'd get some of them get like that. And I'll catch up with you guys. And I think from what we have made historically so far, that the elves and fae have been allied for a long time, so more than likely there's a fair amount of elves and fae in the Cloud City. Yeah, I'd say it's both of them. Like, we definitely sort of seen it as more of a fae nation because we had the Halladar monument there, and we know that there's a fairy king there too, so they seem like fairy have the advantage, but not necessarily. We could easily make it a 50-50 nation if that's easier for us. And I think they would see themselves as equals because both of them came into existence around the same at the same time. Sounds like you're a team reptile. Just kidding. I'm team everybody. I'm team all of them, in all honesty. I believe in not having any biases with any of the races in the game, and kind of making sure they're well balanced and that there's intriguing characters among all of them, and definitely will be trying my best not to favour any of them, because I think it's important to sort of represent each of the races as all great in their own ways, with an interesting cast of characters in all of them. There's definitely not an evil one. I'll be saying that there's no such thing as evil races in our game. If there's an evil character, like, or someone that's a real bad guy that is of a certain race, it doesn't mean they're all bad in that race. You know, that's a stereotype. There's like, yeah, bad and good and evil in all is how I see it. It's possible that the elves and fae have pockets of society now, for sure. I mean, it probably isn't realistic to think, oh, only fae and elves live in the Cloud City and everywhere else in the world is empty, because naturally they will want to explore. If the fae and elves are living in this Cloud City, of course they're going to see this big, massive continent full of resources below them and want to sort of take over. I think that would be very natural for them to want to have done that. So I could imagine it could have been in an honourable way with this fae leader, where they convince their people, and people get behind them because they want to spread their prosperity. Like, they're in the Cloud City, right? And I'm imagining this scenario, and they're looking down at the continent, and they see the tribes of reptiles and beastmen and kit forming, and then the humans, and they're looking. And this is the time of the second civilization, when the humans just form, just before the second civilization starts. They're probably seeing the humans come about, and they're probably thinking, if they're honourable, which is the direction I'm going with here. I don't want to go for the typical fascist. I kind of want to put a spin on it. I don't want to be like, oh, let's kill them all. Like, that's a bit typical. Seeing it as looking at the humans, and especially if they're not of that nature, because we know that the fae aren't the sort to look at another race and be like, let's kill them all. They're actually the opposite of that. They look at the humans and think, I want to sort of nurture them. I want to spread our greatness, almost in an arrogant way. You know, it could be, especially from this crazy, this king that we're talking about. They might be like, I want to spread my greatness to these people. These people on this continent, and they could be using that as an excuse for all we know, but people buy it, and then they go down to the continent and invade the lands, but not in an aggressive way, in a way where they come in peace and sort of convince the humans in Kit that they want to spread their culture and ways of life to them and help them be prosperous. And they're like, oh yeah, and then they become king. I mean, fae birthright. You know, I'd imagine they were there. They could have been the king of the Cloud City at that time, and they got there through birth. And that's why the Walker had the law of no more birth. It's got to be from skill in our new government structure. And then they just eventually, along the way, just got greedy with their magic. Something could have snapped. We don't know what. We'll have to think. We'll have to make it good. Why it could have. That eventually. And then that would have, again, the whole sequence of event where the Kit of that time ran to the other side of the coast and built the safe haven, which is the monument to the Kit, by the way, the safe haven. I mean, I dread to think the state it's in today, if it's in that gritty crime zone, but it it's inspired many good things today. We know that it's inspired the law of the walker, so for sure. And yes, so that would have happened. They probably wouldn't have wanted to be part of that civil war, because I'm guessing it's a civil war because there's no other peoples in the land. It's almost like this king owned the whole world. Like, they're the center of it all. There's no threat elsewhere, right? Because they've already made all the people be with them in one single culture. But it can backfire because people feel alienated. Some of the humans and beast races might have felt, well, I don't feel like I belong in this fake culture, and it all seemed nice at first, but it isn't nice actually, and especially if they're seeing things go like magical greed and that, and they don't have that magic as strongly. There's an imbalance there for sure. So I think that would have definitely been a toxic scenario. Let me catch up with chat. So I currently get the impression that the owls are mostly around the snow, salt flats and mountains, but that's mostly because we have a snowy region elf and Lusar's monument in the mountains. Yes, so that's an interesting perspective for sure. So it's good to look at the characters that we've established that are already got a bio on the Lore Bible, sort of get an idea of their vibe, and think of where they'd be in the map, which we did once, didn't we? We placed everyone on a map, so we should review that soon to check. But Met seems to be on the ball there and remembers. I know that we put Tristan in the snow zone, didn't we? And he's an elf. And for sure, like, I think you'll get them in certain regions more predominantly than others. But there might be the odd elf that's in the jungle zone, for example, especially if they're an adventurer. I suppose it would depend on what their job is. If they're an adventurer, they'd be on the move. But if they are more like homely, then they'd be round where their people are in certain areas. We also have an elven warrior as well who works for the government. He's a knight. We have ex-veterans in David's character and Adriel's character who are human and Kitka. So I'd say it's quite a multicultural military that they've got. There'll be a chance to explore that military in more depth and things that have gone on, because there's a lot of potential backstory there too, and we'd have to look at their profiles. But there's probably just one solid military, but I mean, there's definitely factions, like mini factions and groups of criminals and bandits and raiders and tribes still, for sure. I mean, we've got the reptile tribe of like Fall in the Case. We've got probably some in the desert. We've got Chub Cheeks, his mini reptile group. We've got, gosh, there'll be multiple factions, that's for sure. But thinking of one solid large military, professional military, like career military, it's like going to be the one run by the main government, I'd assume, under Dolos and Traitorio. It's possible that the owls moved north more later, but your Assad monument is the furthest south. Yes, so I definitely think early on, especially in the age before the tribes, before the beast races come about, the owls would have populated Everbloom, but they probably moved on afterwards in the modern ages, once the reptiles started populating Everbloom. They'd have moved on at that point, but they still could exist in the forest somewhat. I know that Winter and Raidu would have their house based in Everbloom, their original house where they lived together, and there's probably other fae about too. Same with Kung's character, who is elven, who is also based in the Everbloom Forest. So yeah, it's definitely not going to be a case of, oh, all elves are there or all elves are here, because it's definitely at this point in time lots of culture together, but some areas more than others. You know, some more than others will be populated with multicultural, and others will be more single or just a couple. But it's definitely something to consider at some point, that's for sure. Probably migration over time, I bet. Consider that the elves probably migrated north. They may have lost their kingdom to humans over time, and rather than fight out, drifted north to their allies. And given seems that may start concentrating somewhere in the southeast. It's good that you guys are noticing this though, because it's all going to be very helpful. I think at one point we'll get the map up and spend even like most of the stream going into more depth. I know that we've already started on that, placing NPCs on there, but it'd be good to really think about these things even more. And when we've got an idea of a summary of the history and have an idea of who we're going to have and in what period of time and what they did, we'll have more of an overview on where everyone would have been at different points in time. Realising that humans would not do well living in the Sky City, of course there might be bitter elves among them. Oh yes, there'd be people with different opinions, that's for sure. This fae, if they had this honourable sort of mission to spread their goodness and prosperity to all, there definitely could have been some people that were like, no, let's just have it for ourselves, and there could have been a problem for sure between them, and some like little mini arcs going on with past people in that city as this was happening. So that's something to consider. So let's have a look what this Wikipedia link is that Matt sent over. White Saviour Complex. Yeah, it is a self-serving manner deep down, because it's almost like it seems like they're doing something nice, but it's just because they're just so arrogant, really. But yes, it's not like necessarily a race thing, like ethnicity or anything, because obviously in this world we're gonna have elves, fae, humans, kits that of all different colours. Every single one will get different ethnicities in all of the races. But yes, it definitely goes with that sort of thing. So I think that could be a bit of influence that I could read up about to say. Got my dinner, will be lurking the rest of the stream. Thanks for today. You're welcome, Kung. Thanks for hanging out. Appreciate it. It's good to see you again as always. Alright, so we got a few thoughts out there. I'm going to get the notes. I might get the notes that we've talked about in, but I'm going to just check if there's anything I need to mention that could be super important. Right, just to expand on this, I just want to, because I didn't spend enough time really going into the differences here, because some of you guys might find this interesting. I'm going to just expand on my knowledge from the video and articles I was reading on these two things. So I'm going to actually split those. I'm only going to write a short sentence for each, just to describe each of them. Different resources, e.g. food, water, stone, dyes, spices, etc. will be all over the world. Where they are could be where an empire will try to expand to, especially if the land, well, the region has what they do not have. So that's like a resource focused empire. Maybe the Fae King was that way inclined, that they wanted to come down for resources, but I don't think so. I think they'd have been more for this one for sure. It was more about the people for them than the resources, I'd say. But I'm interested in exploring the opposite one for the first civilization, if we want to have a different spin on a different kind of empire at the time before. But obviously we'd have to make them flow into each other nicely, and we don't even know who that leader could be yet, but that's something we could consider, who that could have been. But either it could be another elf or fae, because they are the most powerful. It's very easy to make an emperor an elf or fae, but it could have been a beast race person. They'd have gained some influence at this time by then from being wandering tribes of beasts. It'd be cool if we had it be a beast race that doesn't have much of a status yet in the game, like a kit. We don't have a kit legend. I mean, we do have a kit legend. I mean, we don't have a kit cat legend. We don't have a full furry cat legend, a pure feline one. So if we wanted to sort of mix it up and have it be one that we haven't given much of representation yet, we could have it be a kit cat, the one that was the first civilization ruler. But that's just me just thinking of everybody if we don't want to repeat ourselves. But if the scenario fits better with someone else, then I won't be blind to having it be just a kit cat. But it's all what's going to work best. I think it's best to plan this second one first, and then think of the first after that with what is going to work best. Because the second one is definitely the most important, because that's closer to the present day, and it's been the one that's inspired the Walker Law. So just quickly get in the security one. Disconnected. Other people form together, well, band together to strengthen themselves and form security. So it's a little bit, it's kind of close to security, a resource, but different, because it's more inspired by being stronger and strength rather than resource based. But those two things definitely inspire empires to form in the first place, because no empire just forms for no apparent reason, right? There's got to be a motivation, and those are definitely two. But this one, to me, the nationalist one, is by far the most interesting, because it's more personal, and it involves people. And obviously you've got your typical fascist one, that is the most common, where they want to destroy others because they fear their traditions being broken, or they're just, whatever excuse they want to use. But the one that is interesting is like the one that I'm intrigued to explore with the Fae, where it's actually the opposite, and they want to embrace the other races. But it's not all as nice as it seems. As we said, it it's kind of, it can form a single culture nation, which is bad in itself. Okay, so can form out of either strife or prosperity. With strife, there is concern of losing traditions. And an empire is formed to prevent decay and loss. And with prosperity, it's the opposite. They wish to share their wealth and prosperity with the rest of the world. Having, well, and may have a self-righteous belief that their way of life is better. Right, so yeah, those are the three really. And there might be others for all I know, and if anybody knows any others, feel free to share if any other, but from what I gather from the research I've done, those are the main inspirations for why empires form in the first place. Okay, so knowing that stuff is great, because that's going to help us know where to even begin with our own in ours. Which is helpful because we know that we're going to go down this route with our second civilization, because it fits best with our narrative. With the Worldbuilding, looking at our history of time and seeing all these races form over the ages, it's the most believable scenario to me that the elves and fae would look at all this happening at this time where humans come into existence. They're seeing all these people, all this life living, all these tribes forming, and they'd have probably seen the first civilization happen before their eyes too, if they were watching down from the Cloud City. They will look and could easily have this sort of belief where they think, yeah, let's look after our children. It's kind of me expanding on what Vandalia said a few streams ago about elves and fae thinking, no, we're not going to kill Traitorio and Dolos in the capital because we do not kill our children. It kind of carries on from that sort of viewpoint. And that means that today, in the present day, the fae now still have that same foundation with their beliefs, but they're more isolated because of multiple reasons. Maybe one of my reasons was because there could be some shame attached to what happened in the past, but also they do not want to cause any trouble no longer. Or maybe there was even a deal made at that time after the war ended that they keep away because of what happened. I mean, it could be multiple things, and I'm totally excited to hear if anyone's got any thoughts of what they think's the best and most suitable scenario. And with the two fallen empires in the most recent kingdom that became the government, I guess we can have one be of each type. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think to sort of explore each, definitely is more interesting because it doesn't make any of them too similar to the other, and we're not making any of the empires be a repeat of the previous one, because it can get a bit repetitive in some ways parallels are fun when you follow the same thing, but in regards to this, I think it's cool to explore it being different. Now, our present day one, which one do you think suits that one most? I mean, we know for a fact that looking at our map, they are into the resources because they sort of have got their fingers in every pie here, right? They're probably they've placed themselves purposely by the farmlands, or it's more like the farmlands formed after the capital because they wanted the juicy crops to be as close to them as possible, so they'd get the goods faster and quicker than anyone else. We also know they've created raindrops. They've invented raindrops even well before Traitorio and Dolos were about, that raindrops were in existence. And they probably, likely scenario is that they get a lot of rainfall in the highlands, or over the years, over the millenniums, the highlands and the swamp and the nearby regions, particularly the swamp and highlands. The swamp is their base, highlands is where the castle and headquarters is. High rainfall would mean they would make that raindrops their currency because it gives them control. They are seeing what resource they have more than anybody else, and it's a way to assert their power because they know they have it in abundance, and they might give it fairly and sort of equally give everybody their fair share, but are they still probably are the richest. But looking at what we got, I'm seeing the current government as a resource empire because of the raindrops and because of the fact they're probably taking advantage of all these lovely little places and the things they've got. They've all got a bit of everything, right? That will make sure that that's the case, that there's different resources that are making them very abundant in the capital. The security thing could be, though. I mean, it's not impossible to think, that's why they've got the mountains by them for that security, because it's a massive defence. And, the swamps in themselves are security because they're probably a bit horrible. So that could be. I mean, I could see it being a bit of both. But the resource thing is definitely greed motivated, which gives me more of the feels of what this government are like. Is it possible that Els and Fae are on their last straw with the humans because there is so much encroachment of land? Because there is another thought that should be kept in mind. While parents do love their children, there's a point where the children need to be punished. You can't always let children run rampant. There could definitely be some Fae or Elves that have this viewpoint. Whether they'd all share that viewpoint is a question, because I could imagine the Rouse can develop a mind of their own and they could be split opinions. They're not a hive mind, so there could be a split and a divide in that. I think that would be realistic and believable to see different races and different factions having different beliefs and disagreements and conflicts between each other. So yeah, totally. I think that could be believable. And are you thinking that's a present day thought? I mean, I think that makes sense as a present day thought because they've seen humans live here long enough now. But back in the age of the first men, humans had just arrived and they might have wanted to protect them back then because there's this nurturing side of them that might, but not, like I say, not all of them. There could have been some that were totally against it in the Cloud City. Maybe they had their own civil war. But in the end, the Fae Emperor had won, clearly, because they were the one that became the most powerful person in the nation. Yeah, current day thing for sure. And okay, so I mean, I know in general in fantasy, some elves, like Skyrim is the case. Elves are the racist ones, right? Well, the high elves in Skyrim are. So it definitely goes with what's expected of elves to go down the route where they take issue with humans. But it's definitely interesting to turn it on its head and have them like really like the humans as well. But I'm for having it be a bit of both, you know. I've always been fond of different groups of people within the same race sharing different beliefs. It just makes it a little bit more real and true to the reality that not everybody has the same opinion. Okay, so yeah, we will we'll make this blue then for raindrops, for the colour of raindrops. You know, it's interesting, like they probably absolutely love, they have the advantage when it comes to rain as their resource more than anyone else. But imagine if the rain stopped and they didn't have it anymore, right? They'd panic. They certainly could lose faith in the people, could lose faith in them, and the empire could collapse. Well, the government, because it's more of a government rather than empire in this commoner day, in the modern day, sorry. But that's why I want to make another section in a sec titled Reasons Empires Can Break Apart and Fall, because that was really fascinating as well, like the reason that they fall in the end. It's really deep, that topic. It can get super detailed. But a lot of it can come of people losing faith in them, and the one big empire splitting into like disconnected groups. Pardon me, but there's lots of reasons. Oh my goodness, my tummy did a massive rumble. I didn't hear chat. I mean, the security one could be the first civilization if we do want to do the thing where we have one of each. Current, well, present day government, we'll say. Second civilization. First, and I'll put that in brackets, a question mark, because we're not 100% sure yet, but we'll keep that in mind to explore that for that one. And I think that could be realistic. In all honesty, that makes sense, because at that time, tribes, there would have been lots of disconnected tribes, lots of beach races, disjointed, disconnected. So it would make sense that someone around that time wanted to form a more solid unity and be stronger together kind of outlook. So rather than being loads of separate wandering tribes, be together as one big empire back here. And that could fit with the Kitka at the head of it all, because we don't have a Kitka figure in history yet. We're sort of we're balancing it with all the races. Then this one, we're going with the nationalist one, which is really going to flow nicely into the Age of Kings, where everything's kind of, they've realised how terrible it was and how it started a war, and things are different now and much more wholesome, or so people think. I'm so hungry. hungry, but it's getting closer to dinner time. Soon. I think we're getting some good thoughts down, although it's all very summarised still at the moment. We're sort of doing decently. I've coloured them just because if we need to highlight certain sections that apply to the different governments and empires, we might want to colour them just to clarify that. So orange for the second civilization and the nationalist type, and blue for the present day government and the resource type, and black for that one simply because we haven't wrote about it yet, but that we can give that its own colour later if we want. So okay, so I just want to make another subheading, just sprung to my mind then, before we write the second civilization one. Oops. Present day governments / factions. And this is present day, but this is more throughout history. Well, they're the largest ones. But these are just mini ones of the present day, but there's only really 3 right now, and obviously we can expand on that as we really make the story richer, because I know there's going to be loads. I mean, we've got Draw for a start in Everbloom, and probably some in the desert, and then we'll have we've already got quite a few in our community characters listed when it comes to factions anyway. But I'm thinking more of what we've got on our map and what is 100% set in stone from what we can see here right now, like the key ones, the key governments. We obviously have the capital. The other one is the Cloud City, which we briefly discussed, and I don't want to forget that one. And the other one is the Urban City. Now, if we do decide to make these 2 their own separate countries, the urban city in itself will be the capital city of this country, and this capital will be the capital of this country. But we'll just call it the urban city for now, because that's how we know it. So those are the key solid ones in the world right now, and of course we'll have lots of little mini groups and tribes and groups, but we just focus on listing those ones for now. Just before I catch up with chat, I'm going to just briefly write a sentence for these. I think it's just good so we can keep track. It's so easy to completely forget about the urban city and the cloud city if you're not careful, but these all have to tie in with the other. How we write history has got to affect how these are today as well. And we'll just say no government exists here. It's an anarchy consisting of small factions and criminals. And it's like they just run themselves because they're too far out of reach from Oops, there you go, guys. I'll have to make sure to show you that. They're too far out of reach from the capital now, and because they didn't have any sort of solid leader in place back in the day of the kit when the safe haven was built, it was great for that time. And everybody was super inspired, but obviously the kit passed away eventually, and nobody was around to sort of be a leader, and it's lost its way a bit. But we can reform it as the hero in the game if we want. That'd be great. We can reform it. But I'm glad that it's carried over back into the capital those ways, and that it hasn't been completely lost. The Cloud City. Now the Cloud City, let's catch up. Let's see what Met said first. Well, we were thinking of the Nationalist Empire being the one where the Fae were crazy in magic, so I guess the civilization was the Fae-led one. Yes, that is correct. So I'm going to just highlight here the leader, the ruler, Mad Fae King. So we just for a bit of clarity, and we'll put underneath here first civilization ideas ruler, kit car with question marks, because we don't know for sure. The only reason I'm saying a kit, it could have been a kit car, is because we don't have any important historical figure that represents them yet, and we have the other races. I mean, technically we don't have a historical figure that represents a human, but we do have powerful modern day figures that represent humans. So we've Traitorio and Dolos. So we've ticked up that one. But the first civilization is a bit more vague than the ideas for the second, but it could easily be a security type of empire, simply because a lot of disconnected tribes would have been around at that time, and they could have easily have been inspired to band together to strengthen themselves at that time, because just imagine it was all very disconnected back then. And so the Kicker could have been a really inspirational figure that wanted all the beach races to come together as one. But obviously something could have gone wrong there as well, just as it did with the Fae legend, but we don't know what quite yet. Who knows? That's up for discussion. So I'm just going to colour these in with the colours that we've highlighted for those. Orange for second civilization and green for the first civilization. And that would help explain why the safe haven had to be made on the ground when the Sky City might otherwise seem like a place to escape. Yeah, so that's very true. Like, the Sky City's there, but only for elves and fae, right? I mean, humans, beasts might be welcome. Kit might be welcome, being the descendants as a kicker, but we don't know. Like, we do know from Scaly's profile on the Lore Bible, if anyone wants to look under the characters on the Lore Bible, if they want to know. See, her profile does say that she was exiled because of her. She's a noble. She's the daughter of the king there, the current Fae king, but she was exiled for talking to outsiders too much. So it seems like they're very isolated to the degree where nobody's welcome. I don't think they'd be evil. Like, they're obviously not like evil because they're not like taking over land. They are letting the people on the continent live in peace and rule themselves. They're not disturbing Traitorio and Dolos or like doing anything like that, but they are pretty isolated and don't like anyone being welcoming anyone into the place. We can write something like, because there's a lot to say about this Cloud City, but we can just write as simple as possible right now. The Fae and elves living here are by far the most powerful magic users in the world. Well, we know that because the older you are, the longer you've lived, the larger your magical core. They could destroy humans running the capital if they wanted to, but they don't, and that's such a key thing to notice here. And it could easily have been a plot point if we didn't know, a plot hole, sorry, if we didn't notice that. That they're but we did notice that that's the case, and we have a good explanation for it now. To them, they are their children, and they do not harm their children. I think that could, I know that Van's mentioned a different belief to that for some elves and stuff, but for sure that opinion could exist, and maybe in the present day it's more of a stronger belief, but this could have been the overall opinion of throughout history while they've been living in the Cloud City. But you know, it's not black and white, and no, the elves and fae aren't all in one box here, and I want to very much make that clear that it's going to be faes and aes with different opinions. That's very important, that we don't just make every single fae think one way and every single elf feel that the same, because that's stereotyping. It is not in their nature to be violent. But maybe but sometimes I'm really going more into depth than I thought with this. We might have to make another section for this if it's too long. But sometimes the unexpected happens, and perhaps once did. Right, what I'll do instead is I'll say, read below under second civilization ideas, because I'm going to expand on it there. So this is where we're going to talk about the rule of the Mad Fae King ruler, and it's relevant because we've ended it with it did happen. So historically important Kitka sounds good. It just makes sense, doesn't it, to have it be them, because if we have it be a reptile, well, we've already got a very strong reptile leader with this justice legend here. We've got Chub Cheeks, who is a clear leader in the present day. We've got Rex's character, who is a leader of the resistance in the present day. So we've clearly got a lot of strong draw ruler figures in the game. We've got two elf ruler figures in the game of history with these two. We got the fae here, and we're getting the new fae that we're making now. We got the kit for the safe haven. We got the walker one in the capital. We got the humans with Dolos and Traitorio, and you know, it feels like the Kitka's the one that hasn't had the chance to shine yet. So for sure, that it just seems right to me to go for that race, because we don't want to leave the Kitka out. Kitties need love too, right? And maybe they were more of an honourable empire leader, if we want to mix it up a bit and not go with this one being quite as bad as the fae. But it's up to us where we take them. I'm sure they weren't perfect, and there was flaws with that one too, but we're definitely a bit more vague on the ideas for this one right now, so there's room for, you know, for exploring with that one what could have happened. And the first civilization also formed soon after the moon disaster, so they'd want the security against the abundantly dangerous corrupt figures. That's a good observation as well. I mean, the tribes would have existed for some time, and I imagine life was pretty wild when the tribes were forming. I mean, the wild animals and monsters had just appeared, and people were getting used to the natural disaster and trying to survive. It was a rough time of survival, this time when the Fourths formed. And the elves and fae were probably like, what's going on? Who are these? But they probably saw them as the descendants of the dragons and kitsune, which we haven't really talked about them because they're not an actual present day race in the game like the elves and fae are. They're like legendary, extinct. But they're not actually extinct because they do exist. We know that Tristan's character's looking for rare dragons, but that's what they are, rare. Like, there's probably just a handful of dragons in the world at most. So they are virtually extinct. But it's really cool that these are descendants from them, and it makes them some more badass for them to have like a legendary creature ancestor. And yeah, life would have been rough, and for sure it would have been rough here. What we've got to remember is this is the first civilized form of people that have ever formed, really. I mean, it could have been civilized back then, I'm sure, when the vampire elf lived, and things were pretty advanced as well, tech-wise, back then. It all just got destroyed in the natural disaster, because obviously it would have had to have been advanced tech-wise because he invented the tower. You've got to be a bit of a badass to do that. Okay, but in the new age, this is the first that formed. So there's a lot to consider there, but it's good to notice these things. And it backs up the reason why they'd want the security. For a human figure, I think we're going for a human discovering the X-ray in Roundup. So I think so too. I think I can see like the modern day government being mostly human, and but it doesn't we don't have to necessarily feel they all have to be human that are in the government. It can be multicultural. The fact that the Walker legend is the one with the laws and they're a beast race means that it wouldn't be weird to have a beast race or other race in the modern government. We know that Azrael's character is a military veteran, so clearly they do have kicker and beast races in their military, and it kind of does work for them to do that and not just limit it to just humans. But I think so. It could make sense that humans were the ones that took advantage of their abundance with raindrops and established that as a currency. That would have been a pretty powerful thing to have done back then, and I'm sure they'd have needed a good excuse for why they were going to replace their old currency with raindrops, because people could have easily thought, well, you would have those be the currency when you've got more rain. People could have really revolted, but there could have been a really good reason why the old currency was failing, and we'll have to spend some time establishing that at some point too. So expand it. Before we finish up, we'll still stream through a little bit longer, folks, because I want to get these down. So where did we end? We said, but sometimes the unexpected happens, and perhaps once did because there was someone who was violent by nature. So they may have been, I'll underline that just so that we're separating they may have been they were someone born into power. They need to be that, because that ultimately is the reason why the Walker's saying we're not having anyone by birth anymore, because it was bad. We're having people by skill and merit and skill in art. There was someone born into power, and you did say, I remember last stream you said, didn't you, Met, about, I've noted that down actually, during the past, empires might have formed based on who was born soonest after the previous ruler's star appeared, which is pretty cool and links well with the star law, and that could have totally happened in the age of first men during the times where the empires formed, the two civilizations, and they'd have had their successes as well. They went on for thousands of years, these did. So these two leaders that we're making now were the ones that had the most influence and of that empire, and seen as the most famous of those empires through the time that they existed. But of course there'd have been successes, because they couldn't, the beasts wouldn't have been able to have lived that long, 2,000 years, and even the modern Fae have shorter lifespans than the older Fae. These ones lived for about 200-300 years. So that could have been how they realised who was going to take over, be the next, because there would have to be a way they'd have done that, and that fits nicely in. That's a nice simplistic way to have it be a way that people would have decided, and you could say that was by birth, right? It's a bit different to actually genetics and it actually being someone's child, like traditionally, but it's still a sort of way that you could see it as that. So it's something to consider. So they were someone born into power. Perhaps people saw them as, people trusted them at first and saw them as gentle, just like elves and fae in general who share this belief. It's like they but over the years, they became obsessed by the strength of their magic. I think it's an interesting thing to explore, somebody who did become obsessed with their magic in history, rather than not have explored that happening, because knowing that elves and fae have got this strength and ability with magic, it's having this be something that happened with someone in the past could be a good explanation for why they have self-control and why they discipline themselves now with their magic and do things properly and the way it should be. Because it's always nice to sort of set things in stone, to give reason for why things are the way they are, because I'm assuming people of the modern day that magic users are self-disciplined and well-trained, and they don't get greedy about it, they're more humble about it. It's like learning from history that isn't how things are going to be anymore. And maybe in the olden time, like the older ages, like the age of the stars, the age of kings, nobody even was ever like that in the elves and fae kingdoms, because everybody was just so harmless and peaceful. But you always get a one, don't you? And it's kind of a warning to them. Nobody, I mean, it's feels like it would be too perfect if they'd never had anyone that took advantage of their power over all the thousands of years of being amazing magic users. So we don't know the details of how they could have become became obsessed with their magic and what sent them spiraling out of control, but that's up for discussion. Something like that is like, I'm only getting a summary here of how things could be. This then started the biggest war in history. Yeah, this is what started it all, because we know that war happened. We know from when we wrote the kit that something was so bad that they had to escape and make this safe haven. Things were probably awful and terrible. And what better than the second civilization period of time? What would have went on to form a better rule and government structure shortly after? In fact, we will get rid of running the capital because that's very specific. So we'll just word it as they could destroy humans if they wanted to. Right, so we could say when they saw... We'll just keep it like that. I think that's vague enough. That applies to the past and the present day. The Kit legend. And the Kit legend who built the safe haven in the West. I'm starting to see that these three legends of the age of the first men could have lived at the same time. Because the Kit legend would have been alive to see the war, to have built the safe haven in the first place. The Walker would have been alive to see the war because they were inspired to make the government change to the structure afterwards. And the Reptile could have been around during the war as well. I see that it could have been possible that all three made a deal at that time, and that's what why the capital is so art inspired today, because they took influence from the city in the West. The Walker was sort of influenced by what happened to the city in the West, and maybe also influenced by the justice and equality in the South, in the desert with the Dra. So it's like they looked at each other and what each of them stood for and formed a better rule and better sort of way of life in the modern day. That could work. And there was a few thoughts that I got down from your ideas last stream on that in the notes as well, somewhere in these 26 pages. And we'll also say here it was also what motivated change. And the lore of the Walker legend. Okay, so we could expand on that and say the Fae government and Elven. I mean, we'll put Elven in brackets because they might not even see themselves as responsible for what happened with the Fae. They could be separate from it and might have not really had to say, but maybe even the other the Fae in general didn't. It's not their fault that there was someone that they trusted that let them down. Everyone's vulnerable to being betrayed, so I don't think it's something we could blame the Fae themselves for. It depends what they did, really, and what they did during that time. The Fae nowadays, we'll say in the Cloud City nowadays, are very different to the Fae Emperor of the past. They are isolated and don't interfere with others' affairs. It's almost like they don't exist. Yeah, and also that makes you think, how on earth do they get their resources? It's because on a floating island, you'd be so tempted to just go down and grab stuff, and maybe they do, but who knows how. If you don't exactly see them, I mean, Fae are around, they're on the continent, but probably not the governmental figures. There's a lot of room for development in this Cloud City. I mean, we know that we're not going to be exploring it till late game, in regards to we won't be visiting it till late game. A much later episode, the last episode, but so it's nice to keep things a bit mysterious until then, but it's also nice to think because we can foreshadow it early on in dialogue and reveal little mysteries, even if it's not 100% fleshed out, like line by line and like a novel. Even if we know small details, it would be nice to foreshadow them when it's relevant in early game. If the Fae government found a way to turn lead into gold, that would make them very powerful for a time and also make gold economy eventually collapse, making people look for something harder to counterfeit. They probably take care of things secretly if this situation is the case. What's the context of what you're responding to, Van, just so I know? What Met says is interesting as well. I'll be looking through the VOD and expanding on the notes after stream as well, folks, with some of the stuff you've said. But we'll keep that there for now. I think that's enough information then. I'm thinking before we close things up, is there anything else we should discuss? I think there might be. So we've talked about the governments around and places of power in the present day. We've talked about the different kinds of empires. We've talked a little bit about ideas for what the first and second civilizations are going to be, which is great. And the only thing I haven't discussed that I wanted to discuss is what makes an empire, like what makes an empire fall in the end, what it is that ruins them. I've got to go, sadly, though. I've just been called for dinner. I think we've ordered a pizza, so oh damn it, I wanted to finish it off by talking about why a government, what makes an empire fall, but what we'll do is we'll go into, I'm coming, I will go into the next stream talking about that, and then we'll yeah, we'll carry on with where we've left off and go into some other elements of world building as well. So I think we've talked about quite a lot of stuff anyway. The gaining of resources, obviously they must obtain it. They probably have magic to transport the stuff to them. Alright, and if the Elton Frey aren't nearly as powerful as their ancestors, one that might come to mind is they could really destroy humans now. Something to consider. That's true as well, because they aren't as powerful as the ones from the past. They might not even feel like it's worth it, and they're not in a position to do anything. But definitely the ones years before could have been. I mean, the ones of the first men, even the king of the man king that we're talking about, wouldn't have been as powerful as one from the age of the kings, like well back. But they still would have had they're still stronger in some way than obviously the humans. Alright, try to look for the Empire Collapse stuff in preparation for the next stream. But yes, there's still a bit of a difference, even though the modern ones. So all I'm going to say is it's a good job that this Fae, the second civilization, wasn't one of the old Fae, because if they were, they would have destroyed the world. I'm assuming that they weren't as strong as they believed deep down, and that did contribute to their downfall in the end, because otherwise we probably wouldn't have ever died. We wouldn't have ever killed them. Awesome, guys. So I didn't really read thoroughly what you've said because I'm in a rush now, but I will be rereading, going through the VOD and checking over what you folks have said. But thanks for sharing your thoughts. Now we'll carry on exactly where we've left off and move into talking about some military things and conflict and war related things, including the reptile and human war next time. So take care, everybody.